Welcome, everyone, to this evening's virtual event. Go ahead, Anna.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Paustenbach, and I just want to start by thanking everyone for joining us today. James and I are so excited to really create a community space for everyone, and we're so grateful for Barbara's Bookstore for supporting this. Something James and I have discussed at length is how beautiful it is when we all work hard to create community, even though we're apart in this strange time. And there's something really beautiful in the opportunity that it offers as well, because here I am in California, we're the bookstore in Illinois, and we have an author in the United Kingdom who has such a good, excited attitude because it is the middle of the night for him. So thank you again for joining us. And Barbara also has a discount for everyone. You'll see there's a link right here. And the other thing I wanted to say is, in the spirit of making this a community conversation, we really welcome all of your questions and comments, and the best place to put those is when you click on Ask a Question. That will allow you to type in questions for me and James to see and field as we have a discussion. My name is Anna Paustenbach. I'm an editor at Harper One, which is an imprint of HarperCollins, but I'm also the very proud editor of James's beautiful book, The Oak Papers, which I have here, and it's just so stunning. And I'll just quickly introduce James before turning it over to him. He is a writing professor at the University of Essex in England, and he wrote this beautiful meditation, really talking about his experience visiting this old 800-year-old oak tree called the Honywood Oak, and he blends together the history, the ecological context, the spiritual context, and literary, everyone from Virginia Woolf to Thoreau, and some ancient myths as well. So I want to turn it over to James and to give us just a little bit of information about what inspired this book.
Sure, thank you so much, Anna, and thank you so much to everyone for coming along tonight. I think I would have to say that. I'm not sure if that's just a noise thing there. Hopefully that's not affecting any noise for you. Yeah, I think if I was to start to talk about, sorry, we've got a bit of a noise issue. Can anyone else? Anna, have you got a? Oh, should I turn my volume down? I've got mine pretty low. Maybe that's more helpful.
Sounds much better.
Good. Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. It's midnight in England, and maybe over here we have to have our volume right down. Maybe that helps. But yeah, look, this is, first of all, thank you so much to Harper One for this beautiful edition. I just think you've just done so much to the quality of the cover. This sense of that I had back 8 years ago, as it was actually, when essentially I was working in a school, in a middle school, as you would call it, as an English teacher, and I just started stopping next to this. On the way home, I would stop next to this 800-year-old oak tree, the Honywood Oak, as it is called. It has a name, and it was just sort of like on the way back to home. And the first time I went and stopped there, I met the guy who's in charge. It's a small English estate called Marks Hall, and there was a guy there who's the head gardener, but he's also known as the curator of trees in the estate. And he's an amazing guy called Jonathan Jukes. And right from that first meeting, when I talked to Jonathan, and I just said, look, would it be? I've just got this plan to just come and sit next to this 800-year-old oak tree, and just really kind of get to know it, and get to know the community of kind of creatures and birds and bugs and bees and, you know, whatever else lives around it. And I was really fortunate because Jonathan, you know, a lot of people might just kind of dismiss you, but Jonathan was great, and he understood what I meant, and he's a bit of an expert on oaks, and he likes his oaks as well. And so he just said, yeah, sure. And he agreed that I could just come in through this back door onto this beautiful English estate. And so I was able to do this any time, day or night. So I was going in different times of day, different seasons. You know, I was there in the snow, in the rain, I mean, in the sunshine, everything. And I did this pretty much for about 2 years. Not every day, but certainly every week I would be there next, and I got to know this tree, and it was pretty powerful. I mean, it was a pretty powerful kind of thing to get to know a living 800-year-old creature. You just don't get to do that very often, if you like. I guess that was the kind of was the kind of realization that I had, that this was an individual living being that I was getting to know, and that was certainly powerful. Yeah. I thought the best thing is probably, in terms of introducing the book, is just to read a little from the opening section that I just called Beginnings. I think that probably just would frame things for, you know, for everyone today.
Yeah, I love that.
Okay. Wherever oak trees grow around the globe, people have developed a connection to them. Throughout human history, particular oaks have been favored for their setting, for their age and size. Ancient oaks have always been special. People collect beneath their boughs. They may gather there as a place of significance within the landscape, or merely as somewhere to shelter. Whereas we humans are creatures of movement, oaks are static beings. They do not shift. They are born and they die on the same patch of earth. It is that sure-footedness that is so appealing. Ancient oaks hold a powerful sense of longevity, the sense of security, the sense of attachment to a place across time enchants us. We are drawn to old oaks. You can stand beneath a grand oak and know that your more distant ancestors did so too. Oaks hold on to the memories of earlier generations. By touching the skin of the oak, it is possible to feel some tentative trace of those that have gone before. Human beings and oaks have lived beside one another as neighbours since the earliest times, and we continue to do so. We no longer need the bodies of oak trees to build our homes or to fuel our fires, and we no longer need acorns to sustain us through hard years and meagre harvests. Yet on some level, we still lean on oak trees. In ways we do not fully understand, we need them. Yeah, so that was kind of from the opening, and I think, you know, that this is obviously, I wrote this, you know, a number of years after that initial meeting with my 800-year-old oak tree, and I'd done a lot of research by then, and then, you know, there were many strands to the research, as you kind of mentioned, Anna, the kind of literary associations. You know, I come from a kind of literary background, so I was really intrigued with chasing, you know, both my memories of, you know, Thomas Hardy, Gabriel Oak, these kind of references, you know, as you say, Orlando, Virginia Woolf, and things like, you know, Shakespeare references. I spent a lot of time in the British Library, just searching through, and I just built up this huge repository of oak knowledge, and alongside that, I did a lot of research into the ways in which oak trees have been used in prehistory. So both by indigenous peoples, and by people in the deep past. And one of the more stunning things that I discovered, not my own research, but through other researchers, was this remarkable thing that the early farmers across the northern hemisphere, wherever there were oaks, they had this reliance on oak trees, in which, through the capacity of the acorn harvest, it would allow them, during those first years of farming, if their crops failed, they could always turn to the acorns to survive, to make bread, to carry them through, harsh winters. And I just thought this was incredible. Here was I with an 800-year-old oak tree that had seen, the best part of 30 generations of humans on that spot of land. And you could go back further and further back in time, 6,000 years. And it was trees like this that were allowing my own ancestors to have lived through those early years of farming. It just became more and more profound, if you like, the more research I did in some ways.
I love that. And thank you for starting off with the reading, because I think that gives people a sense. Obviously, it's your direct words, but it gives people a sense of something that I found so special about your book, which is that this oak is a character in this book. And that is a really important distinctive. And it leads me, there are a couple of really powerful pieces of this book that I think, while your story is so unique because you visited this tree every day for so long, which many of us don't have that experience, yet many of us have this experience, particularly now, of finding respite in the natural world. And so I would love to hear, your thoughts on why it's important for us to have a connection in some way. I know that sounds very large scale, how connection with nature, but there's something to be said even for something of right in our backyard.
Yeah, I think it's so true. It's been so true throughout this whole pandemic, that I think across the globe we've seen this need, this really basic need for humans to be in contact with the natural world. And that we find a kind of solace in being so, And I mean, a lot of my family are in London, for example, and during the first lockdown, the parks were really busy with people. Once people were allowed to go out, everyone really, I think, went back and really appreciated, the nature on their doorstep, as you've kind of alluded to. And this was something that I've obviously been considering for a number of years. I mean, I teach what we call wild writing at the University of Essex, which is this kind of combination of literature, landscape, and environment. It's very much connected with notions of the natural world. And I think we've seen in recent years a huge increase of interest in nature writing and writing about the connections between humans and the natural world. And I think, in quite an important way, as we head into the future and try to deal with issues of kind of climate change, climate emergency, one of the essential things is that we as humans are connected with the natural world. Because if you're not, then you no longer care for it. And we've already seen the difficulty of that in the last, whatever you want to call it, 150 years since industrialization. As people are disconnected from the natural world, you both have this difficulty of increasing industrialization, but you also have an impact on the humans themselves. We need to be in a good place, if you like, as humans, in order to be dealing with some of the issues of climate emergency as well. So it kind of it all works in together, and it becomes a kind of wider narrative about well-being, both of individual human beings who we now realize feel better when they go walking in the woods. And we now have scientific evidence that the phytoncides, these chemicals that are being released by the trees, are part of that effect. But if you'd spoken to my granddad, he'd have told you if you go for a walk in the woods, you're going to feel better. He might not have had the science to back it up, but that's still that same sense, I think, of the importance of connecting with the natural world. And we know this as humans, don't we? It's kind of deep within us. And as a city dweller, I come from London. I now live out in rural Essex. But if I knew it in London, if I didn't spend time out walking, even walking the streets, getting into the parks, it would affect me. I wouldn't feel as good. So I think all these kind of deep knowledges that are within us, are now to a certain extent being explored by science. And there's some amazing kind of ecological work and scientific work of various kinds that are showing this nature connection, this natural connection that we have, and we shouldn't forget as well, we are nature, we are of nature, we are just a species of, on this globe, and to see ourselves as anything different is both it's going to be problematic down the line, but it's just wrong as well. We're just another little bit of this natural world, I'm afraid.
I think that's a really wise point, and it reminds me of something you said earlier, which is playing with humans being reliant on oaks. It used to be in this very physical, using timber way, but you've clearly shown there's a new way in which we are reliant, and it is one which actually has a lot of very proven benefits, many of which we can feel pretty organically on our own. And I wanted to ask you, pivoting to your story in the book, one thing that I have always really liked about this story is that you came to this journey from a place of grief, and it was the ending of your relationship. And then from there, these beautiful things started blossoming slowly over time. So I was hoping you could share with people a little bit about, I guess twofold, what that process was like for you on the journey in the time of going through it, and also what it was like to write about it later. That is certainly a whole other task.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think sorry, I'll keep that volume down. I think one of the things that I realized is that back at the time that I started to go and see this oak, I was in a relationship that was breaking down. And I think as much as anything, the two, I never saw the two as connected at the time, but obviously to a certain extent, I think there was the peace that I was finding by going and sitting by this ancient tree, was also a reflection of a kind of a need to find peace in my own life to a certain extent. I mean, I think it has to be said that I was looking for a new project. I just finished a book and I just started teaching wild writing. So I was there also kind of I genuinely did want to get to know, the ecology, the ecosystem of the oak tree. But very, very quickly, I realized also there was a peace, there was a calm, personally, that I was experiencing by being there, which hadn't been kind of uppermost in my thoughts when I started this project, if you like. So yeah, it was a difficult time, and I think over the next 2-3 years, in a lot of ways, it was a process of me kind of evolving, I think, as a person. And there was certainly layers of grief, as you say, you know, in any breakdown of a relationship, there are these layers of grief. And I think, you know, to a certain extent, my way of not, I wouldn't say dealing with it, but one of the ways in which I found solace was by stepping into the embrace of an oak, if you like. And that continued, because what I then realized quite quickly was, you know, this 800-year-old oak tree was a drive away from my house. It was a kind of 10-15 minute drive. And I started to realize that, you know, there are oak trees all over the place. They might not be 800 years old, but there's one about 1.5 miles from my house, which it's just on the top of a hill that I call Two Oak Hill. And I would go and sit in this oak. I could just climb up into it really easily. And again, that became a place of solace. And I think, you know, placing myself into these environments was a kind of nurturing of self process. You know, and hey, it was only really in the last sort of 3 years that I started writing up my work over the years, or if you like, my time with oaks. And it was then that I started speaking to, you know, various people who were far better versed on the kind of well-being aspects of this. And you know, and they said, well, you know, it's no surprise, if you like. So, you know, I spoke to kind of environmental scientists who would tell me about, you know, studies to do with EEGs that were put on people, and then they were you know, allowed to walk. There's a famous study, for example, where they walked through Edinburgh, and what they saw was that the patterns of the brainwaves changed dramatically as they went into green spaces. And the psychologists and scientists call these meditative states, you know, so that we have this capacity within ourselves to take ourselves into places, literally, you know, into greener spaces, which make us feel better, you know. And I guess this was part of the was me working out these, as you say, these kind of aspects of grief within the relationship, if you like. Now, I should say, I hate to say, this book it is a memoir, but it's not, as some people have called it, kind of misery memoir. It's not really a book so much about the kind of the darker aspects of that relationship breakdown, if you like. It's more, I would guess, or I would frame it perhaps as being more about the uplifting atmosphere that you can experience by being with oaks, if you like, and with other humans as well. Obviously, there are other human voices in this as well.
I think you said that perfectly, and something that you do very, very well that I think, as an editor, I love to editorialize, I suppose, but you know, there's the argument that we have short attention spans in this moment. But what you do so well is you choose something and you dive in so deeply with every angle you can think of, the historical, the literary, you're drawing on Harding, you're drawing on Thoreau, we were talking about that part, and the biology, which I imagine is a bit outside of your comfort zone. So I think that embrace of going very micro is really what's so special here, and does become immersive for the reader. So I can affirm what you are saying. And we have someone from our community. Our community discussion has a question. This is from Tom, and this is James. Did you always feel a connection to oak trees or trees in general in your nature writing?
It's a really good question. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, but you know what? That idea of community as well. You know, this kind of barbarous community for me, it's a lovely little world to step into, from my little rural cabin hole out here in the wilds of Essex. So thank you, both to Barbara's and to Tom. You know, Tom, the truth is, I think I was probably like the majority of kind of city kids. You know, if I saw a tree aged 10, I'd try and climb into it and maybe pull a branch off to get a stick or something. You know, I couldn't say that in my adult years I had a kind of deep, close affection for trees. I mean, you know, as I say, I was in a place where I was teaching English literature at you know, at secondary school, as we call it, you know, to teenagers, and you know, I guess I would be encouraging the kids to go and hug a tree and stuff like that, but you know, but I wasn't knowledgeable about trees. As I say, I was teaching at that stage. At the beginning of this project, I was actually teaching wild writing at the University of Essex 1 day a week. So I was starting to spend more time thinking about, like, more seriously, the kind of academic aspects of the natural world. You know, and my first degree was actually in geology. So I kind of came at things. I mean, I only managed a year before I had to kind of switch. But you know, I've kind of one of those people that kind of has had a swing at most sort of sciencey stuff as well, and has ended up in the kind of vague literature fields. So yeah, I mean, and look, I mean, I've always liked trees. I've done a certain amount of work with people like the Woodland Trust, who we have over in these parts, which is basically, you know, the idea of, when I was a teacher, I enjoyed taking kids into woods and seeing their reaction, because everyone's happy there. You know, everyone's happy. You take a bunch of kids into the woods, they're all right. Everyone's just running around having a good time. You know, I mean, we kind of know it, don't we? You know, so but yeah, I mean, I think that was the thing with this 800-year-old tree, is I just thought, oh, that would be good. You know, that'd be interesting to go and see. And I knew something about, you know, the complexity of the ecosystem. But yeah, it was nothing that had kind of haunted me throughout all my life, some sort of deep connection with oaks in particular. I guess what I should say is that from the first time that I went to that 800-year-old oak tree, I was told a remarkable story by Jonathan Jukes, which was that only 60 years or so ago, there'd been 300 of these ancient oaks on that site, and that they'd all been cut down in the 1950s, purely for money, just for a bit of cash. And this one tree had been allowed to remain living, of the ancient oaks. So, you know, from a kind of writerly, literary perspective, I guess, I mean, I genuinely, at that moment, I wasn't thinking, oh my goodness, that's going to make great narrative, that'll make a really good story. But I was just genuinely kind of like, oh my goodness, that's really shocking. That's a really shocking thing. And I was actually taken by it, by this guy, Jonathan Jukes, the curator of trees, who very much is a tree guy. You know, he is a tree guy. He's brilliant. But he took me off in his Land Rover, not that time, but about probably a couple of months, maybe a month later. And he took me to this site where they just had pigs on the site, and they cleared all the bramble and all the root system. And we went out to this area of the estate, and you could see these, they seemed to me like kind of dinosaur footprints, I think was the kind of analogy that I made. And they were the sections of these ancient oaks, the bottoms where they've been sliced from 60 years ago. And it was genuinely unnerving. it was genuinely like stepping into the graveyard of, I mean, it was the graveyard of these oaks, of this ancient woodland. But it was really powerful. I mean, it was really powerful feeling. And Jonathan was the same. You know, he's like a tough woodsman. And both of us just sort of stood there in this space and didn't say much. You know, we really didn't say much. So sorry, Tom, I've waffled away from your initial question, but no, I mean, I wasn't anything special. You know, I'm from the city, so I know nothing about trees really, compared to someone like Jonathan, who's he's spent decades exploring and building his knowledge of ecosystems. But now I can have conversations with tree people, which is pretty good actually. Yeah.
I must say, Jonathan is probably my favorite character in the book. But I also think, James, you being a city person and being able to have such an intimate relationship with a single creature is very aspirational to all of us who are not rural, not raised with literacy about the natural world. So I think that that's actually quite, at least for me, quite encouraging. And, you know, we have another question from our audience that I want to bring in, and it's tying into something I've thought about, which is, well, clearly everyone's thinking about it, that you are this teacher and you're this seeker who's also on their own journey. So in that teaching element, we have a question from Sierra, and she says, Mr. Canton, you mentioned you teach nature writing. What do you advise your students to look for in nature, specific sights or sounds? Wow,
great question, Sierra. Yeah, yeah, I do. I'm really fortunate, I think, in my position. I think, you know, we can't do so many field trips at the moment, but that's what we do. We go out and we do field trips and we go off together. I mean, I think the main thing I always try and get across to students is to spend time outside as well as inside. So the motto of the course is our outdoor classroom, you know, with this amazing image of this beautiful kind of scene locally. And we do that. It's getting the balance between those two aspects. So we very much encourage, you know, time in the seminar, researching, exploring. It might be other nature writers. It might be, you know, some specifics to do with, a particular landscape. But then we literally physically step out of the seminar room. And I make this, that we do it in seminar one, that we, you know, meet, greet, discuss what we're going to do, and then we go out onto site. And I might, you know, we might go and stand next to there's two cork oaks that will, you know, and I know we can trace that they were brought back by this guy to Essex from the Peninsular Wars, from Portugal, you know, in 1816. They were planted. He brought back these two saplings, and I think, you know, it kind of teaches right from that first off that you need stories. You need to kind of story your landscape. For humans, that's what we do. We tell stories and we kind of narrate bits of things, bits of natural world. And, you know, I think it's perfectly brilliant to be, say, telling stories about beetles or about, you know, stiletto flies, which I got really interested in this. But you kind of need to frame it for the humans, I always think. If you're the writer, that's what you need to do. So you might know the science. You need to know the science. You need to know the cultural kind of reflections as well. And that's what I'd suggest. But you're absolutely right. You're hinting in your question, the sensory aspects to a kind of experiential process of being in nature is very important when you're then going to try and put it onto words on a piece of paper. Because we need to be able to smell, you know, whatever it is in nature. We need to be able to feel it. We need those visceral connections. So yeah, getting out there and doing the research, and then kind of honing the two into some sort of formative narrated piece, I think, is probably the way to go about it. It's easy. It's no problem.
You're making me wish I had done things differently as a college student and had done courses like
There's always time.
That's true.
There's
we
always
are always
time.
Students. That is true. And I have a related question for you, which is perhaps for this book specifically, perhaps for other writing that you've done. How often do you write outside? Obviously, you're taking the inspiration from outside, but how often are you writing while there?
Yeah, no, I write outside a lot. I mean, for Oak Papers, I was physically outside next to this oak tree, and I had, notebooks. I kind of would take a small library with me of half a dozen books, and I'd sit on a bench, and then I'd often leave the books on the bench and go wandering with my notebook. But these smartphone things they're amazing writer tools. So one of the things I'm often saying to my students is, voice memo or the equivalent is just a fantastic tool, and so it's something that I use on a daily basis, really, for writing. Is that often I do like being outside, and might be sometimes something will just strike you. You just notice something, and you can use your voice memo just to kind of roll through a kind of an initial narrative. I'm not saying that would then be translated directly onto the page, but that with some photos, when you get back to your study, you've then got the framework. There's a practical element as well. It has to be said that in the old days before those things, when I just would have my notebook and I'd be on some Scottish island and I'd have a pencil and it would be pouring with rain, and it's quite hard. It's quite hard to be making your notes and remembering, what it is you're focusing on in your writing. So there's a kind of practical element as well. And I think, I do think to a certain extent, kind of the modern nature writers, travel writers have kind of got it easy a bit with recording their words while in situ.
I love that image. We have another question from someone who is asking a question that I had as well, which is, and this is from Peter. I should give you the shout out, Peter. Did you ever speak directly to your oak tree? And you can feel free to be honest. Safe space, the community of Barbara's book. Yeah,
that's a funny one, isn't it? I don't think I really did, in the sense I didn't speak out loud. I think, I come from a fairly kind of scientific background in some ways, really, and I guess I've got elements that you would call kind of pseudo spiritual to a certain extent, but I know people that are much more kind of open. Like one of the people that I interviewed in the book, and is a practicing pagan worshipper, and she would do kind of tree meditations, and she would kind of connect with trees. It was very powerful talking to Sarah, very good, amazing woman. I think, I've been asked this before. I might have had the odd chat. I mean, I have been known to have the odd chat. I certainly talk to my guinea pigs and things like that, and even the fish. I'll have a chat with the fish, but I don't think me and the Honywood Oak would kind of have conversations, but certainly after a period of time, there was a kind of a level of connection, if that makes any sense. I really remember like moments, for example. I mean, it's a big tree. This is a big tree, and on the what I would call the west end of the tree, because it's kind of 28 foot round. So there was a little nook, and you could just kind of sit on there. And sometimes I remember like sitting on there in the middle of winter, and it's freezing cold and there's snow around, and I'm just kind of perched on this. I'm feeling this real kind of sense of, I don't know, being kind of looked after. I think I must have been feeling a bit low, and so to that sense, I would say there was a connection. Whether you'd say I was actually communicating, that might be pushing it. Certainly on a kind of verbal level, but on a deeper level, yeah, I think that can definitely happen. And I think there was a process going on there. I really do. But yeah, maybe I should go back and. I mean, it'd be like, I kind of like when I walk back onto the estate. I mean, I haven't done it for a few months because I haven't been allowed, but I definitely kind of like, all right, how are you doing? Kind of thing. But in my head, nice to see you again. You're looking well, sort of thing, that kind of process. I mean, I think one of the, I'm being a bit flippant, but I think I kind of hinted at it, but this kind of moment of realization. I mean, maybe I should just turn to one of the great modern living American nature writers to kind of frame this, because it was a big moment for me when I had this kind of realization that that tree was a living thing. That was big. That it had lived there for 800 years. That, okay, you might have said that's naive, James. You should have known that. You should have worked that out. Yeah, but it was that was a realization. But look, let me just read this section, because this is from, it links in when I was reading Gary Schneider as well, who I think is, a significant figure who, I'm sure a lot of the Barbara's gang will know Gary Schneider's work. So anyway, it can take many years of being in a place before we are finally able to see what there is to see. Gary Schneider, the poet and environmental thinker, writes in a place in space even, of walking past an old oak for 20 years before one day he actually paid attention to the specific oak and felt its oldness, suchness, inwardness, oakness, as if it were my own. It is a moment of revelation, of intimacy. As Schneider says, there is a dramatic sense of suddenly meeting the oak. It is much the same way for me in the field oak. Only recently I have given the time to pay attention to that specific oak, to contemplate the individual essence of that oak. Now I understand what it is to see each oak for its own oakness. It is not hard to do. It merely takes a little time. Look at the oak tree before you. See the pattern of the trunk, the branches, the canopy of leaves. Then you will start to see the details of what makes this oak tree different from every other oak tree that grows upon the earth, which has ever grown upon the earth. Each oak tree is unique, just like each human being. It is that process. As I say, I started not driving so much to the Honywood Oak as much as anything, because I ended up changing jobs and working full-time at the university. But I realized that there was what I came to call the field oak, which was just a lovely 60-year-old oak tree just at the back of my house. I could just walk out there with a cup of tea and kind of take on a similar process of the getting to know, getting to recognize that oakness of that tree, and the more meditative side of things then realized you can do that, with a 60-year-old oak tree. You can do that wherever you have the capacity to, whether it's in the park, wherever it may be. I think something like Richard Power's book, The Overstory, that was great in kind of showing. Oh, it was just great in so many ways, that book, but it was great at showing the kind of connection between individual humans and individual trees in fictional form, and I guess it took me a while to work that out, but yeah. To go back to the question, I would say yes, I was in many ways, and in many ways I still do just talk to my trees, but I just don't do it in human word form.
I love that. I think it's actually quite relatable for a lot of us too. And your discussion right there, really going so deeply into like observing and listening, it makes me think of another question I have for you, which is, your work is unique in that your sort of direct experience with the natural world, and then there's the writing. Both of those things have the potential to either be energizing or a little exhausting, and I'm curious to hear more about that balance of deep noticing, writing about that. How does that look for you?
Yeah, I mean, it is a balancing thing. I mean, it's interesting sometimes. I'm thinking sometimes you step out into the natural world, and if you're kind of seeking things to write about, that can be the wrong way of going about it. I think with my experience with the oak tree, I'm very pleased that I began with this slightly naive notion of a project, which was to go and sit and learn about the ecosystem of oak trees. There was no element at the beginning to a kind of to any kind of more kind of deeper connections with the natural world, with exploring aspects of spirituality, with exploring aspects of kind of ancient druidic practice in Britain, as noted by by the early Romans. There was no kind of a sense of wanting to do that, and the project evolved. It evolved in kind of many strands, both from, as I say, kind of these kind of literary strands of going back to Homer, and remembering and then rereading about how at Dodona in ancient Greece, it was through the susurrations, the whisperings of the oak leaves, that the word of Zeus was passed down to mortal men. And this is what Odysseus was told, how he was told to return to Ithaca. And I was kind of like, wow, that's, what I mean is these kind of layerings, these kind of moments of learning as the writer, just kind of naturally evolved with this book. And most books, I think, books evolve differently. I mean, the last book, I've just finished a book, and I wrote it over about a year and a half. This book, for some reason, it took longer to write, and to a certain extent, I wasn't expecting that when I began it. I really did think I was just going to be putting together something to do with getting to know an oak tree, quite a dry book, probably quite different from how it ended out. From it, as I say, kind of going and interviewing, environmental psychologists, practicing pagans, an amazing guy that I know called Dylan Pym, who's a woodworker, so someone who actually works, physically works with wood, and yet has this, and also has this deep kind of spiritual connection with trees, and even with the kind of, if you like, the bones of the trees after they've been taken out, after they've been felled. What he then does with them is creates beauty. He sculptures, he bends oak wood to create amazing furniture. So I end up, I started by looking at, what birds and bees there were around this tree, and ended up interviewing amazing, sculptures of wood. And I guess that's the tension in the writing. You don't want to know at the beginning. I don't want to know exactly how the book's going to work out. Then, for me, there probably does need to be that tension. Other people might prefer it other ways. They might have it all written out, and they know exactly what's going to happen. But as I said to you, even from that first meeting with Jonathan Jukes, curator of trees, once he told me this story of 300 ancient oaks that would have existed were it not for, just the pecuniaries of the local people, if you like. It was such a powerful story that then, that then changes everything I knew about this tree. Suddenly you look at this tree and it's amazing. This tree has lived here for so long, and then you start, I think one of the things when you're working with an ancient living being that's been there for 800 years is you relate human lifetimes to it, and with this one particular tree, there was a well-documented evidence that in the English Civil War, troops had come and they would have sat under that tree. It was only 400 years ago. As far as the tree is concerned, it would have been a big tree 400 years ago. And we know that these troops under, Thomas Honywood, where the tree took its name ultimately, these troops, these parliamentary troops came and positioned, garrisoned under there, and then went and fought in the siege of Colchester down the road in 1648. It's all written down. So we also have this aspect that I could have told a very human story about this tree, but I didn't. I kind of held off doing that, if you like.
I think you've started to answer another question we got this time again from Sierra, which is perfect. Which is she has two questions, which I think we can probably get to in the time left. We have a little less than 10 minutes. The first is your oak unique in the world? Is it notable? Do people know about it? I'll start there, then we can try to get to the next question.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Perhaps because my garage door was opening in the middle of me talking. Sorry.
No, I didn't hear the garage door.
Intimacy of in-home programming. You're welcome.
Yeah, that's good. It's homely.
Her question is your oak tree unique in the world? And I think she's asking if it was well known since it's so old. Not
particularly. No, it's a good question, but hey, look, over in the United States, you've got some pretty good oak trees over there, and I guess that's the truth of this. I don't know specifically in the States, but over here we've got, websites where you can look up your local ancient oak tree, and you'll find one just down your road. I see it just coming in the chat that Lane saying this makes me want to grow an oak tree. Yeah, do it. There's, I've got a tiny little oak over here that's just growing in a vase. We call him Oaky, obviously, but yeah, you can do it on a wine bottle or whatever. But it's a lovely little thing to do with just getting your acorn, and the roots go down, and then the first leaves come out. It's a lovely thing to do. So yeah. And that thing, every tree is unique, is individual. Every one. Amazing. Yeah.
You've answered the other question, which is, have you ever grown one? And yes, you have. I know. I've seen photographs. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Love it. Though we have just. Oh wait, I think we might have had one more question. I was going to say, if there are others, speak now. So Nancy has a question for us, and she said, I'd like to know which came first, the writing of the memoir or discovering the oak?
Very much just the kind of the oak came first. And then I spent, a long time just hanging out with the oak, making notes, lot of notes, lots of photographs. And there were about 3 edits to this. There was a first version that Anna hasn't seen. That got burnt on a bonfire many years ago. But yeah, I mean, there were, and it kind of evolved, and I realized, that I didn't want it to be this kind of dry version that I was kind of writing just purely about the bugs and the birds and the bees, because my own knowledge was expanding and evolving so much. And then I wanted to hear from other people. I was getting fascinated by aspects of like the word druid. I mean, I'm not a druid. I know there are practicing druids, but the word druid is just from ancient Greek, meaning oak knowledge. So it's to do with the knowledge of oaks, And again, we go back to the early commentators, and they talk about in Britain the druids, cutting down the sacred mistletoe from the sacred oak, wearing these white cloaks, and we don't quite know whether did they really, were they really doing that? But there does seem to be this sense of connection between, if you like, the wisest of the ancient peoples in Britain and in other parts of the world, and their connection with oak trees. And I think that goes across a lot of indigenous cultures. So stuff like that. I needed to get that into the book. That wasn't in the first version, so it had to evolve. It had to evolve, yeah.
I love that question too, because well, we are just at the end here. I'm so grateful for this community that joined us today, and for the opportunity for James and I to have such a good discussion. And I'm merely editor, so I won't say much, but I will say from where I sit, this is a really special book that I think is so timely for right now. I know it certainly has spoken to me in my experience, but also our staff at Harper One. Everyone has sort of said this is the medicine that I needed right now. It's one of the things we say a lot in our imprint is we're publishing books for the world we want to live in. And I think that I just want to vouch that James has in fact captured that beautifully. So, James, do you have any closing thoughts for folks before we go and before you can finally tuck in? Because I know it's the middle of the night for you, and you've been such a wonderful companion here.
Well, look, just to say, really, thank you so much to Barbara's really for organizing this. The Barbara's gang, as I now think of them, think of us, this community. But look, Anna, really kind words as well. That's very kind of you to say such things. And I'm just seeing bits of the chat coming in. Lovely people like Lisa saying she can't wait to read the book, and that means something to me. It really does mean something to me. And I've been much better. I've got into Instagram in the last 6 months or so. My daughter's taught me how to work Instagram, and so look, anyone out there who's been lovely enough to come along today, please get involved. Get involved. Get in touch with me on Instagram. Just drop me a line to just tell me where your local oak is or whatever. Maybe tomorrow or no, today with you. Go and say hi to your local oak. And kind of take it from there. But yeah, no, just a big thanks to Barbara's and to Harper One particularly, and to Anna for coming along today. Thank you.
It's my joy. Well, thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks.